So 16 million of us did not vote in the last general election, a staggering third of the 46 million people eligible to do so in the UK. That's more than those that voted for Conservatives to win, 10.8 million. And if we look at it another way, 66% of the country decided how 100% of us should be governed.
So what happened to the unheard third, a term I wish I'd come up with, clearly not clever enough to have done so? The 33% of us that just checked out, disengaged, not bothered. Pretty much every political party is aware we've got this problem. The huge number of people that just won't vote. Why should we, though? It's something Marnz and Dina want to talk about. They both grew up in Pakenham in southeast London. Marnz is 19 and has never voted. Dina is 27 and has never voted in a general election. She did, though, vote last summer on the EU referendum. Marnz and Dina, welcome to Five Live.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. So, what is the question you have for Five Live listeners this afternoon?
Why should we vote?
It's as simple as that.
Okay.
85058 0808 5909 693 and at BBC 5 Live.
So, Marnz, I guess, how would you answer that question?
Why should we vote? I couldn't really answer it, because I've never been taught how to vote, or no one's really came into my school and told us why should we vote or the reasons behind voting. I've been oblivious to it.
Does it ever get talked about with you and your friends?
No, not once, not literally.
So what's your attitude to politicians? Is it along the lines of Skepta lyrics where we don't care about politicians for your isms and schisms? Is it a bit like that?
It's not a thing that we don't care. It's just a thing that we haven't been taught nothing about it. And the government really, where I'm from, we feel like the government hasn't really helped us in a sense of way.
So the environment that you grew up in has just been the same regardless of whoever's running the country?
Yeah, especially when it comes to crime. And a lot of people my age, they feel lost because we ain't got no guidance and things like that. And the government don't help with that. There could be youth clubs to help out the youth, but there's not. There's a lot of things that's not really happening.
Who is your local MP? Do you know?
No.
Right, that's interesting. That is very
I
interesting.
think it's Harriet Harman.
Yeah.
Lives Peckham. Dina, what about you? You voted for the first time last year. What made you do it last year and not before?
I think for me it was being a mum of two young boys and recently graduating from university with a criminology and social policy degree. So in the 6 years that I studied, I got to kind of understand and grasp politics a little bit more. And I would have discussions with my mum and older generations in my family about politics and about voting. And for me, I just felt like we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't, but we stand a better chance of airing our opinions and seeing real social change.
What about your parents? How have their voting patterns been over the years?
My mum has always followed politics. My nan, on the other hand, hasn't voted. And I feel like a lot of BME community, in the BME community, a lot of older generations don't believe in voting because they believe politics is an illusion of power.
Okay. Marnz, what do you think a politician would need to say to you in order for you to say, OK, I'll vote?
I think
How could they persuade you?
if they focus more on the youth, because the youth is the future, if they focus more on the youth and was to change a lot of things, how we could change, especially when it comes to crime, because crime's a day-to-day basis where I'm from. If they was to help us in that type of way and education way, then probably I'll be more persuasive to vote.
So you don't think that the politicians, the government, can keep you safe in your environment? They can't protect you in your environment?
They can, but I feel like they haven't been.
Right. So they're choosing not to?
No, I just think they're unaware of what's actually happening in the streets.
Right.
Dina, why do you feel that so many people like Marnz don't vote? I know you're not speaking for him because he's sitting right next to you, but what's your view on it? After doing social policy and that at university, what's your view on why people are disengaged, particularly young people?
As it stands, there is a lack of quality of political representation. So coming from a BME community, how do young people identify with the politicians that are governing our society, our world? Half of them have never experienced the social factors that have an impact on the BME community. A lot of them have come from good backgrounds with good educations. So for us, it's kind of hard for us to identify or see ourselves in the politicians that are governing our country. And for me, I feel like, for instance, in the last 2 weeks, there's been 6 murders, all to do with young people and to do with knife crime. What are the politicians doing about it? How are they tackling it? Or how are they even looking into the situations that have occurred as to why there is so much youth violence? Now, if I was to look at the politicians that are in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, not one of them, can I say, has lived in a socially deprived community and understood the deprivation that these young people are facing.
There are some, and in fact, strangely enough, this new Conservative government has more people educated at state school level than any post-war Conservative government. There are now more BAME MPs, still relatively low, but there are more BAME MPs than there have ever been before. So it is moving, Dina, in the right direction, but that doesn't seem to be getting through to you, or perhaps you don't think that once they get in, they're doing... And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, you can please correct me, or perhaps you think that once they get there, they're not remembering where they came from, or they're not doing enough to help you?
No, I think you're right. I think there are. It's slow progress, and obviously nobody expects to see a massive change overnight. It is going to take time to see these changes and implement them.
Yeah.
That's why I decided to vote, and specifically decided to vote last year because of us leaving the Brexit, and I felt like I voted to stay in because I knew the implications that it was going to have on our country. And for me, with the BME community, I feel like there still needs to be so much more change. There still needs to be so much more people engaging in politics and teaching the young people of the BME community about politics and why it matters so much. I mean, political behaviour is almost entirely linked to economic and social behaviour. So in order to understand why the BME community isn't engaging in politics, you need to look at what's going on in that community. Why is there so much economic deprivation around the BME community? Why are we facing youth violence on a daily basis? Why is there a disproportionate amount of the BME community that are unemployed?
If you flip it on its head, though, Dina, obviously politicians always look at voter turnout, don't they, before they make their key policy decisions. And if a certain demographics turnout is high, then they are much more likely to make policy that benefits those people in order to please them and get their votes.
Of course.
So you've got to vote to get the stuff that you want, is the argument.
Which is why I vote, but it's also hard to get other people in the community to see your point of view and understand why it's important to vote. We're dealing with young people that are traumatized on a daily basis because of witnessing their friends being killed, or growing up in a lone parent home where their mum are struggling to make ends meet. It's hard to try and get to reach to them and talk to them and get them to understand why it's important to vote. I mean, as my peer said to me, or said to you guys rather, that he never experienced politics in school. He wasn't taught about what politics means and what it stands for and why it's important to vote. To be honest, I never got taught that in school either, and I'm 27 years of age.
But Dina, have you got that excuse anymore? Now, Marnz, do you have a smartphone?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have a smartphone, right? Do you have Snapchat?
Yeah.
Instagram?
Yeah.
Twitter?
Yeah.
Facebook?
Yeah.
Yeah, so with all of those things, you could find out politics everywhere. Like, I grew up, I'm 45. So when I was your age, 19, there wasn't any. So I didn't have in the palm of my hand the ability to be able to access all that information. So
I bet you were taught politics at school, weren't you?
No, of course I wasn't.
Not to even to a tiny extent.
No, I was talking about politics in my school. I went to a comprehensive school in Essex. They weren't talking about politics. I mean, when I went to do A-levels, it was different. That's when the politics came in. But that was after
that's
that.
The age mine sits now.
That was at college. So so if that was happening 25 years ago, then I guess now you have in the palm of your hand the ability to be able to access. And you said that you're on all those social media. How many hours a day do you think you spend going through? I can see the smile on your face, Marnz. Going through Instagram, going through Twitter, on Snapchat, all of those things. So instead of finding out what DJ Khaled's doing right now, find out what the politicians are doing, Dina?
Can
Is it
can
enough
I-
of
can
an
I-
excuse, Dina, anymore to say that you're
I
not
actually want to
engaging?
touch on what you've just said.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's an excuse, but what I would say is when you're living in a socially deprived community and all that's being glamorized and pumped into the young people's heads is how to be the latest rap star,
Yeah, or sports
how to
person,
make
yeah.
money or sports cars.
Yeah.
Politics is the last thing they're going to be engaging in. So, we have access to all these social media routes. But to be fair, when you're living in a socially deprived community and witnessing so many young people being killed, the last thing you're going to think about is let me go on Twitter and see what my latest politician is talking about.
But they're the ones that have the power to actually change that environment in a way that whatever Jay-Z and Kanye are up to, or the latest Yeezys that are out on the streets, does not have any of that power. And yet that you've prioritised that, pair of trainers, over lobbying someone to say, wait a minute, this is happening in my streets now.
But then I would argue that the politicians need to be doing more groundwork. Why is it for the young people? Why should we have to go to the politicians? If you want that position of power over a country and you want to be able to rule over a nation, you should be coming into these communities and talking to your young people.
But they have Friday surgeries, Dina. Have you ever been to your MP's Friday
is not
surgery?
enough. You need to come into Peckham. You need to come into Brixton. Forget sitting in an office and having an open office for young people to walk into, to talk to. Come and experience what they are actually living on a daily basis. Go into some of the pupil referral units where young people have been excluded from school and are missing out on having a full-time education. Try and understand some of the factors that are filtering down as to why so much young people are perpetuating violence. Try going to the hospitals and actually seeing some of the trauma victims that have been stabbed and managed to survive. That's what politicians need to be doing, not holding opening surgeries and thinking that young people are just going to waltz up in there and express their opinions and what they're going through. That's not how it works.
You're listening to Dina and to Marnz. There are two guest editors on Five Live's Afternoon Edition today. The question they are asking is, why should I vote? At the last election, just over half of 18 to 24-year-olds who were eligible to vote chose not to do so. A youth leadership organisation called Uprising has taken 120 young people from Manchester, Birmingham and London to Westminster with the aim of demystifying what happens there.
Lucy Caldecott is their chief exec, and we have Anissa, Alice, Deegan and Hogan who are with her. Lucy,
Hi, guys.
good afternoon. Good afternoon, Anissa, Alice, Deegan and Hogan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we're here from Uprising this afternoon, and we're delighted to welcome such a great bunch of young people to Westminster today. What Uprising does is we work with talented young people, just like the ones we've got in the studio and the ones you're chatting to in your studio, from all sorts of backgrounds, with a particular focus on underrepresented backgrounds. And we help to equip them with the knowledge, network, skills and confidence to express themselves politically and in their communities, working on social action projects. And what we hope is that they'll go on to take up roles in politics and in journalism to really change the face of political engagement in this country.
Now, we're not saying that everybody has to vote. Far from it. We're just asking the question today, why should I? So, Anissa, Alice, Deegan and Hogan, you've all heard Marnz and Dina. What would you say to Marnz, any of you, to change his mind, to say this is why you should vote?
I would say that he said that he didn't know the name of his MP, and I think that's a big thing. Like, you need to get involved. It's a two-way street. You can't expect parties to represent young people and represent our beliefs and our aims and what we want to happen with the world if we don't get involved. If our voter turnout is low, why wouldn't they address the over 75s when over 75% of them are actually going in and voting?
How did you get engaged with politics? Is that Anissa or Alice?
It's Anissa.
Yeah, hi Anissa. How did you get engaged with it?
My parents always voted from a young age, and I don't come from a particularly privileged background either, so I understand that 100%. But I do think that if you don't step up and get involved, like, I do agree they should come into our communities, they should come and speak to the people who are being underrepresented 100%. But at the same time, if you're not the one who's going to step up and speak either, there's just going to be a disconnection between decision makers and us. And we also need to believe that we have that power, that we can be those decision makers. Because the moment you believe it, it starts to happen.
What do you think about that, Marnz?
It's a thing where, like, I'm not choosing not to vote. It's just that I've never been. It's blind behaviour. I've never knew how to vote. No one's came in my school and said, okay, this is how you vote. Same way I've been taught 1 + 1 is 2. No one's taught me how to vote. So it's not like I'm choosing not to vote.
And you're 19 as well, so to be fair, you've only had one opportunity to do it before this, haven't you?
Yeah.
Marnz, can I ask you, because you said how to vote, but is it also about why you should vote? The importance of it? Because there are people I know who are way older than you who just go, well, why should I bother voting? Because nothing ever changes. So it's not just a case of how to vote, but also why should I vote? Which is, of course, the basis of the question today.
Yeah, like, if you look at, like, if I was to vote, I could persuade my friends to vote, and then, like, you're feeding everyone information, and then that information get passed on, and then I'm sure, like, more people will start voting, like, especially if we know why we're voting and what other parties have to offer, which can help us.
So, Deegan, if you were hanging out with Marnz and his friends in Peckham in South London, Deegan, how would you get them to be engaged?
I would set an
Good
example.
afternoon, by the way, Deegan.
Good afternoon. So I would set an example, and that's I think it's important just to, like, actually just step up in your community. And yes, there's issues with social deprivation, but I also think, like, the right to vote is a privilege, because in many places of the world, like, people can't actually vote. So I just think, like, by stepping up and being an example, by showing my friends that, hey, like, voting's cool, and, like, just, like, not just that voting's cool, but just, like, getting involved and tackling issues and saying, hey guys, like, all these, what's going on with all these shootings, like, what can we do about it? And just, like, starting something and actually getting active, and then that's how I think I could influence the people
Dina?
in my community.
Yep.
What do you think of that? That as a way, as a route in to get Marnz and his friends and people similar to Marnz. You know, there are 16 million people who didn't vote, so this is a big group of people. If you just compare it, 10.8 million voted Conservative in the last election in 2015. So there's more people who just didn't vote at all.
I definitely do believe in stepping up in your community and paving the way for the rest of the young people. I believe that a lot of young people, especially growing up in Brixton and Peckham, have the ability to influence their peers. There's a lot of peer pressure in socially deprived communities, and I believe the ones that a lot of the younger generation look up to, especially even the local musicians, rappers, they all have the power to help influence the younger generation, and I think that they should be paving the way and stepping up on social issues such as voting.
Did you see JME's tweet? JME, of course, who's Skepta's brother, Skepta, who won the Mercury Music Prize. JME actually sent a tweet out about registering to vote.
Yeah, there's a number of artists that are actually trying to influence young people to vote. I know.
Does it work?
Nasty.
Do you think it works, Dina?
I think it works to a certain extent because a lot of the younger generation are looking up to these people and aspiring to be like them. So I feel like the more they push out these messages, the more people will engage in the social media and in the message itself. And they will have the opportunity to reflect and really let that message resonate on the choices that they're making in their lives and whether they should be voting or not. I feel like it's a stepping stone. It's not, I couldn't say it's a complete task, but it is a stepping stone in the right direction to get young people to vote. I feel like there's so much more groundwork that needs to be done in the communities itself in order to get young people like the one sitting next to me to vote.
Alice, for you, getting engaged in politics, how did it happen? And did your friends come on board with you, or did they sort of think, no, I'm more interested in other stuff?
I think at school there was kind of a divide where there was the people who were intellectual and interested in politics, and then there's those who weren't. And I think mainly now it comes from social media, actually being like looking at people's opinions and people who are like really interested and engaged in like sharing parties' content.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the biggest spikes in voter registration for this election, I think there's almost 1 million people that have voted to register, new people voting to register since Theresa May called this election. And I think 42% of them are under 24. But one of the biggest spikes that was seen was after a massive Facebook reminder, just to say to people, you know, this is how you vote and this is your opportunity to vote, not doing any party political stuff. How much of your politics do you get, Hogan, from social media?
Well, as I graduated in a politics and history degree.
Oh, you're already well versed then.
So,
You're in.
So yeah.
How did you become so interested in politics, Hogan? Did you grow up in a household which was very engaged?
Yeah, as I come from a very big family, we've always been, well, my parents have, and then up until I was at the age of being able to vote. I've been voting for the Labour Party, but I feel that I do understand where they're coming from with school and not being educated about politics. But I feel that we can't have a fixed mindset where we think, oh, I don't know anything, therefore I can't vote, or I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
The only way you can overcome anything like that, as I'm going into the career path of working in education. So if you do vote now and you feel like that is an issue that can be tackled, where you think politics should be added to the curriculum, we can fight for that, and then that way your kids and your younger siblings will be more engaged from a very young age.
It's interesting to me. I think all four of you have had parents that were engaged in politics. Is that fair to say? Anybody who's just done it all on their own? No.
And Dina as well.
No. So, and Dina, you too. Marnz, what about you? Anybody in your family circle interested in politics? Do you ever talk to them about it?
No, I've never really spoke about voting. That hasn't really came up.
And they've never really mentioned it to you, how they voted or anything like that?
No.
Do you know if they do?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. See, this is really interesting, because I think if it's in your family, you've got a much better chance of being engaged.
Yeah,
don't you?
my father was very politically engaged. Lots of texts coming in. Will in County Durham said, voting. I'm 51, have never voted. My constituency has returned a Labour MP for over 70 years. There's no point in me voting. Vote Labour, they will always get in. Vote anyone else, and it's as good as a wasted vote. Give me a vote that would count to the national total, and I might vote. Please tell your guest editors, says Ruth in Coventry, that they should vote. Firstly, because at the last election, more people didn't vote than voted for any single party. Secondly, because older people currently are much more likely to vote, they are therefore deciding on your future. Joe in Wales said, I really, really, really want to vote, but I know that my vote will be a wasted one over here in South West Wales. But if we had PR, proportional representation in the UK, every vote would count, as in the referendum. That's Joe's point. Laurie said, people died to give you the vote. If you're disillusioned to vote, at least spoil your ballot. Right, we'll come back and talk much more about this, but we have to say goodbye to Lucy Caldecott, Chief Exec of Uprising, Anissa, Alice, Deegan and Hogan. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Dina and Marnz are with us. They are our guest editors today, and the question they are asking is, why should I vote? And you are coming to us in your droves today on 85058 and at BBC 5 Live. Dina talks a lot of sense, this text says. I'm 64 and I've never voted, but if all politicians spoke like Dina, then I would, says Rich from Derbyshire. I think you might have a career in the offing. Just quickly, have you ever thought of that, Dina? Do you ever think, yeah, I might go into politics, I might represent?
Do you know what? I haven't actually thought about that, but I do try to set the best example for my peers and for my sons growing up. I mean, like I said, I spent a lot of my teenage years disengaged with politics and never really heard about politics from my mum. It's since I've become a parent myself that I've taken on that stance and wanting to know how society and my country is shaped and governed.
And just to make it clear as well, Marnz isn't saying that he doesn't want to vote. He's saying that it's just never been talked about. It doesn't know how to do it at this point. It's just, yeah, exactly. It's just something that's kind of an alien world. So today, if there's a politician listening, and there probably are lots of them listening today, Marnz, so this is your opportunity. Why don't you tell them right now what it is that you want from them? What do you want your politicians to do for you?
I think they need to step out the back seat and come forward and come into schools, talk to us more about what they have to offer, how they can help us. Because at the end of the day, we're the future, we're the youth, we're the future at the end of the day. And that crime on day-to-day basis as well, how they can help to change that. And there's a lot of hidden talent where I'm from. There's so much talent in jail. It sounds bad, but there's so much talent in jail. But it's because all we've known is crime, or all we've known is crime. That's how we've been brought up. So if you guys was to come and teach us from young, then when we're older, our eyes would be more open.
What are the things you said? Crime. What else matters to you most? I mean, being safe in your own environment, of course.
Yeah, being safe and our future at the end of the day. No one wants to still be living in Peckham when you're older. We just want to. Everyone wants to get out at the end of the day.
There's nice parts of Peckham. You're going to have estate agents from Peckham calling us up, Marnz, and dissing us but Peckham has actually become gentrified, like lots of different parts of London from time. But Marnz, what else? I mean, for your jobs, for instance, what if I fast forwarded 10 years' time, a 29-year-old Marnz, what would you imagine you would be doing?
I do music myself, so hopefully I'll be an established artist. But for other people at my age, whatever they want to become, hopefully they become it. But when you live in where I'm from, it's sometimes depressing because it's the same thing that's happening every day and we feel like nothing's being changed. So like, if they was to come forward and like help us, then like hopefully things would be getting changed.
Mm.
And what about the idea of owning a house? It's often talked about, Marnz. Is it something that's on your radar?
Yeah, do you know what's funny enough? Me and my friend was talking about owning houses, and he was saying like it's so hard because, well, there's so much estates where we're from, and it's like the value of the where we're from of the flats costs so much it don't make sense. But like if you go like Kent or something, like the value of that house is way cheaper than where we live. Like it's hard to actually purchase the house that we live in. It costs so much, but at the end of the day, like the house ain't like it's not even an average house. Like it's like rubbish at the end of the day.
Do you
Like,
think
you're
you'll
paying so
ever own?
much.
Do you think you'll ever own your own property?
Yeah,
You will.
yeah.
Paid for by beats and rhymes.
Well, it's possible.
No, of course it is. There's plenty of money in the
Dead
music
right it
business.
is.
Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Dina, can I just ask you, it was just when you were speaking to Sarah and said that you haven't really thought about being a politician yourself,
Yes.
but you are engaged. You are someone who steps up. So it's quite interesting. What do you think the barriers are to you becoming a politician? And they may be your own barriers or barriers that you see.
I think
outside.
if I was to become a politician, I would have to be a lot more informed on policy making and what it really takes to really govern the country. On top of that, it would be going into my communities and understanding the different social factors that filter through in the communities in order to win my citizens' votes. For me, politics is such a huge responsibility to take on. Where I am in my life, I personally wouldn't go into politics because I've still got my kids to
The
raise.
fact that you recognise it as being such a huge responsibility and you say it with such passion makes me think that's exactly what you should be doing. I don't mean to force you into it in any way, but you know, it's very rare to hear people speaking with that level of passion and somebody that knows what it takes. But it's really interesting what you said about wanting to learn about policy and how policy is made, because I think you obviously understanding that the fire in the belly is one thing, but actually getting things into law and getting things passed could
Of
take
course.
years off you.
I mean, there are young people in the community that have already published their own policy reports, especially around youth violence, and also about like I look at people like Carleen Furman, who's done how many policy reports on sexual exploitation and women and girls in violence. I look at Kenny Imafidon, who has done a policy report on youth violence also, and is encouraging young people to vote. But at the same time, I've looked at these policy reports, I've scrutinised them, and I've said to myself, well, it's one thing to have a policy report launch, and it's another to actually implement change and actually see it in the community. Anyone can write a policy report. If I wanted to, I could get a group of young people and write a policy report, publish it, make it look fancy and glossy, but on the outskirts, what's really happening in my community, has it made a change? No, it's just informed people.
Now, I just want to be clear to you listening to 5 Live right now, this isn't just about youth voting. This is about the 16 million people who did not vote at the last election. So the question, Marnz, do you want to just ask the question again?
Yeah, why should we vote?
Why should we vote? And that appeals to all the 16 million people who didn't vote in 2015. So 85058 is the text number. Jason from Portsmouth said, I voted but never voted for anyone. I've always spoilt my ballot paper because all politicians are the same, only interested in themselves.
And it's interesting because the 16 million are people that were registered to vote, and that doesn't even include the millions more that didn't register. Peter Barnes is with us, the BBC's senior elections and political analyst. So it's the tip of the iceberg, is it, in some way? It's the 16 million, or am I over-egging it?
Well, there's definitely millions more who aren't on the register, who could be if they wanted to. It's difficult to have an exact number, and it does change from time to time because people are always registering to vote. We've seen quite a lot of applications in recent weeks. But it's probably about 5 million or maybe a few more on top of the 16 million who are registered who didn't vote last time.
Why do people not register?
Well, I mean, I suppose they think that they're not interested in voting. They don't particularly want to take part in the election, and so they decide it's not worth their effort.
Does it vary region by region where, you know, how many people either can vote but don't or aren't registered? How does it break down?
There is some regional variation about turnout. At the last election, the turnout was higher in Scotland than it was in any other part of Britain. There's also a lot of variation between different individual constituencies. The highest was a Scottish one in East Dunbartonshire, which was 82%, and the lowest was in Stoke-on-Trent Central, which is 51%. So there is a big gap. One issue about registration actually is that quite often young people who move around a lot end up falling off the register because they've moved to a new part of the country, and they would have to keep re-registering every time they move. And so probably young people are much less likely to be on the register than older people.
Because it is a bit of a faff, isn't it? If you go to university and then you move somewhere else to work and then maybe you might come home for a couple of years.
You can now apply online, actually. There's a government website. If you search for register to vote, then you'd probably find it pretty quickly, and you can apply fairly easily on that website.
Peter, can I just ask you, just a sort of brass tacks thing for Marnz, who's not anti-voting but just doesn't really know how to. What's it like to fill in a vote form online to register to vote? How tricky is it?
It's not tricky at all. You just need to give some details, which you will have, and it only takes a few minutes. And then there has to be sort of checked. You know, some people apply who already turn out to be on the register, and other people apply who aren't eligible. So there will be a process of checking that you're eligible, but it's not complicated.
OK. What about spoiling ballots? How many people spoil their ballots? And explain to us what that means.
Not many, actually. So spoiling your ballot is where you do turn up to vote, but instead of voting for one candidate, you write something else on your ballot paper, or just leave it completely empty, or vote for more than one. At the last election, there was just over 100,000 rejected ballot papers, as they're called. And that's less than one person. Well, it's about one person in 300. So really not very many. And some of those were probably by mistake. People who put two crosses in, or it wasn't clear which box they were trying to put the cross in. So it's really not very many, actually.
Tracking election turnout, Peter, engagement since the turn of the century, what direction broadly is it travelling in?
Well, this century, actually, it's probably gone up a little bit.
Right.
There was a big fall-off after 1997. Between the Second World War and 1997, turnout rate was always 70% or more. And then it dropped very suddenly in 2001 to 59%. And it has crept up a little bit at the election since then, but it's still below 70. So, there's a long-term pattern where turnout is lower now than it used to be in the past.
Paul has tweeted me, Dina, to say, loving Dina, give her one more nudge into politics and activism. So 5 Live listeners are thinking, Dina, got time to step. No pressure. We're not, putting it on you, but people are listening. People are listening. Also, Adam said it's the sad state nowadays that they all expect it on a plate and someone else should do it for them. How hard is it to vote, really? Is a question that Adam has asked. Well, thank you very much indeed to Peter Barnes there. Let us move on, because we've got lots to talk about, and we have Rachel Farrington here, who runs Voting Counts, an impartial website created by students to help young people make an informed choice at the ballot box. Rachel, good afternoon.
Hi, Rachel.
So, Rachel, Marnz is there with you.
Yes.
So he is exactly the kind of person you should be having a conversation with, hence why we are creating such a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the main points that we try and get across to people has been massively kind of brought up. It's about how the young person's demographic is so low that politicians don't feel like they need to do anything to get our votes, don't feel like they need to do anything to prove themselves to us, because ultimately it's the older generation that are giving them their jobs and keeping them in power. So I think if whoever you're voting for, whether your vote is wasted if you're in a safe seat or whatever, as long as you're voting, you're upping our demographic and making people realise that we are actually engaged, we do actually care, and that if you change your policies to protect us, to make a difference in our communities, then we can give that power to you by voting for you.
Why did you start Voting Counts? For the reasons I guess you've just said,
Yeah, I didn't come from like a massively political family. My parents had just always told me that it's really important to vote, and they told me about the suffragettes and things. And then my best friend was like, I'm not going to vote. I don't know who I'm voting for. I don't know what I'm voting for. And it was the European elections, so there wasn't a massive amount of coverage. So I just wanted to create an unbiased website where people could go and just look at the parties, read why they should vote, and compare the party policies so that they could make their own decisions, so it was not influenced by the friends, family and the media.
Do you face much of an uphill struggle, Rachel, when you are talking to people of your age and younger, over 18, about engaging with the political process?
A little bit. A lot of people, I think, don't realise how politics affects their lives on a day-to-day basis. But what I try to say is think about what you care about in your life, in your community. Is it your local sports centre? Is it your education? Is it your job prospects? Because almost everything you do is influenced by politics in some way. And even if you're just doing issue voting, like you're just voting depending on who's going to provide the most money for your local sports facilities, then at least you're engaging to help that cause.
Let's have James on the phone now. James has given us a call on 08085 909 693. Go ahead, James. You haven't voted for how long?
For 30 years.
Wow. Why not?
Well, going back, it's probably the thing that disillusioned me the most was I used to live in a constituency, not the one I live in now, and I met the local MP, and I was speaking to someone who didn't really have a clue what life was all about for normal people.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what Marnz has been saying. It's just that lack of connection that they have to to people living where you live. But you are going to vote in June. Why?
I think there's a chance. I mean, because so few people vote, your own personal vote has a greater value these days. I mean, since I stopped voting, the turnout's got lower and lower. But there are issues nowadays that I think that if you don't take part in the political process, you don't really have a right to complain about the outcome.
James, thank you. It's really, really good to talk to you. Thanks a lot. It was 08085 909 693. If you want to give us a ring, we've got about 8 minutes left. In the meantime, this should be interesting for you, Marnz. I don't know if you know much about this, but this could be pretty interesting for you. More than 9 million women didn't vote in the last general election. That number's been steadily rising since 1992.
Now, the gender turnout gap between the sexes is also widening, and often male politicians have been accused of not knowing how to appeal to the female vote.
This decline is a far cry from the huge suffragette movement, just referenced there by Rachel, led by Emmeline Pankhurst only 90 years ago to secure the right for women to have a vote. So what's going wrong? Dr. Helen Pankhurst is Emmeline's great-granddaughter. Thank you very much for being with us, Helen. Why are there fewer women voting?
The whole good afternoon, by the way.
Good afternoon.
Because the whole system still doesn't reflect their interests and their views. There's so many layers in which society still isn't equal. And I think until we have equal representation, it's unlikely that we will have all the different perspectives from women voting. I mean, the two are linked.
Well, there has been considerable progress, and some could argue that we live in a golden age for high-profile female politicians, whether it be Angela Merkel or our own Prime Minister or Nicola Sturgeon. And, of course, there are record amounts, aren't there, of female MPs in the House of Commons.
So, yes, it's wonderful that we have so many women leaders. We're still commenting on it, so it's still very unusual. And yes, we have more women in Parliament than we have ever before, but it's still only 29%, so half the numbers that we need, really. And there's a whole weight of history that still means that the system remains very male-dominated. And, that's a pity, because without having... we have a slightly ineffectual Parliament, but we have an even more ineffectual citizenship who don't feel connected up. And if we had Parliament representing everybody's views and looking like everybody, then we'd have a more effective relationship between citizen and Parliament, and therefore our democracy would be richer.
Yeah, as Dina was saying, more BME representation as well in different constituencies. But listen, taking away the gender or the race issue from it and just bringing it down to the brass tacks of what happened in the suffragette movement and indeed in the civil rights movement and in other movements through time where people have campaigned to get a vote. And it always really, I think that's probably what finally switched me on to becoming engaged in politics. And I didn't come to it till much later in life, really, to be honest. But the idea that people actually lay down their lives to get a vote, I found that incredibly powerful. Helen.
You should go and see that film, See Suffragette, because I think it reminds you of the link between the past and how incredibly difficult it was to get to the elements of democracy that we now benefit from, and how many people suffered and what they did. But more importantly than that, how it links up with the issues. So it links up with economic issues, social, and so on. Voting is part of belonging to a wider society, and it links us to the past as well, to our grandmothers and great-grandmothers who might have fought in that campaign or who might not have benefited and then started to benefit. And also, it links us to the future. So any young woman, any middle-aged woman, any older woman now is also thinking about what comes next, so the next generations. And if we don't pass on that baton of citizenship, that baton of having a say in what this country looks like, then what happens next? We have to pass on that baton. We have to not let go.
Just very quickly, Helen, people shouldn't be guilted, though, into having to vote because of history. If they don't feel as though there's anyone, regardless whether they're woman or BAME, they shouldn't have to vote, should they?
Well, they shouldn't. Well, in some societies, in some countries, they've decided that they should. Constitutionally, you have to. I don't think we need to go that far. And I don't think it's a question of guilt. It's a question of responsibility and connection. Do you want to be connected to other citizens? Do you want to be connected to the past? Do you want to be part of the future? Or, if you think of a jigsaw puzzle, do you want to be just a little bit of that jigsaw piece, not connected to anything else? Or do you want to be part of a wider story? It's not guilt. It's about belonging to a wider society and having the privilege to be able to do so.
Dina, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to agree with what she was saying. I feel like it is, as we become adults, it's our responsibility to take on voting. I feel like, especially where she was coming from with the whole female movement, I believe it's so important for females to vote because ultimately we all become mothers and we are the ones that are going to bring on the next generation. And it's important that we have that stepping stone for the younger generation. As Marnz said, he was never educated on how to vote. Not to talk about his background or where he's coming from, but it is a factor. His mum never ever showed him how to vote or engaged him in politics. And that's important. It's so important for mothers to take on that responsibility and say, you know what? I'm going to teach my kids about voting. I'm going to teach them the reasons why they need to vote and the implications behind not voting. Last year, I took my 8-year-old to a voting poll and he was like, Mummy, what's this all about? And I had to sit there and explain to him why it's so important to vote, because voting, it changes your healthcare, it changes your schooling, your education, everything around your life growing up as a young boy is shaped by politics. And if I don't teach you these crucial things from now, you will be one of those boys later on down the line that is disengaged with politics.
OK, Marnz, thanks, Dina. We've been here for an hour or so, Marnz, just under.
Yeah.
Has your attitude changed in the last 50 minutes?
I feel like if I was to vote, maybe like my voice would be heard, my vote would be like taken into consideration type of thing. And like it's an extra vote to push towards like what I would like for my community.
So are you going to go and register to vote now?
Yeah, probably.
Good news. Well, it's up, you've got 3 or whatever weeks to do it. But, again, we've got to respect...
22nd of May. That's the deadline.
So it's less than 3 weeks now, isn't it? Yeah. It's only 2 weeks to go. Gosh, where did that time go? But, it's important to say to people as well, Rachel, people do, over the history of time, have used spoiled votes or blank votes as well. That is an important thing to remember as well, that people have the right not to do this if they want to, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the really important things is what we try to push is blank voting rather than sport ballots, because at the count, some politicians can argue that some sport ballots actually favour them. So if you've written a smiley face in the box rather than a cross, a politician might go, oh, that shows that they like me, so they can count it as a vote. So we're trying to encourage people to just blank vote.
Which says, none of you represent me.
Exactly.
Listen, it's brilliant to talk to all of you and much, much appreciated.
So many people have started this. You've started such a big conversation, Marnz. Thank you very much indeed, my friend. You have got people engaged. So I guess now you can be engaged too. Marnz and Dina, thank you very much indeed.
And also to Rachel, thank you from Voting Counts, Rachel Fountain, thanks. And to Dr. Helen Pankhurst, pleasure to have you on the programme, thanks.
On digital and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
bbc.co.uk/5live.